Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Macon and we will be talking about macromolecules today. You all have heard of the saying, you are what you eat. The foods we eat make up the composition of our body. If you break down all the components of the body, it will turn into 4 heaps of macromolecules or large molecules, namely carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So let's begin with some basic understanding of biochemistry for this particular lecture. The first term is polymer. The root word poly meaning many. That means many units make up one molecule. The individual small units or single unit of each molecule is called a monomer. The root word mono means one. So the next question is how these single units or monomers combine to make polymers or long chains. There are 2 reactions that you must familiarize yourself with: condensation or dehydration synthesis and hydrolysis. Let's talk about condensation or dehydration synthesis first. The root word de means removal and hydration comes from water. Therefore, water is removed and the molecules come together or condense to synthesize the new molecule. So the next question is, how do the monomers stick together to make a polymer? And that is by bonding. And in this case, it's covalent bonding. If you understand the terms by breaking it down into its root words, you have the definition for the term. Now try to define the condensation reaction or dehydration synthesis in your own words. In this reaction, the 3 circles represent monomers. The lines are the covalent bonds, and for every 2 monomers that come together or bond together, 1 water molecule comes out. So here's the next question for you. If there are 100 monomers bonding to make a polymer, how many water molecules will be produced in this reaction? The opposite of condensation is hydrolysis. Hydro means water and lysis equals slices. This is the mnemonic I use to remember. Lysis slices or breaking down. In order to break down polymer to monomer, you will add water. Next question is how many water molecules are needed to break down a polymer that contains 100 monomers. Now, referring to your first slide, remember there are 4 types of macromolecules, and the monomers in all of them covalently bond to make a polymer. We can also differentiate between different molecules just by the name of the specific bond. In carbohydrates, the covalent bonds are referred to as glycosidic linkages. Remember, glucose is the monomer of carbohydrate, so glyco is related to glucose. These are just little tricks I give you to remember the information. The covalent bonds used to make a polypeptide chain is called a peptide. Lipids is bonded together by ester bonds. And finally, the covalent bonds in nucleic acids are called phosphodiester bonds. We have already talked about the 4 classes of organic molecules or macromolecules. Now you must be wondering, why do we have another name for macromolecules? Organic means living. That means all these molecules contain carbon. So these molecules make up living organisms. Another point that I'm going to clarify is that carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids are macromolecules, and all are polymers except for lipids, which are not polymers. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen elements in the ratio of 1:2:1. Example is glucose. The formula for glucose is C6H12O6. If you look at the ratio of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, it comes down to 1:2:1. Now your turn. Find the formula for sucrose and what's the ratio of the elements in that molecule. Carbohydrates, as you know, is an instant source of energy. The monomers of carbohydrate or the monomer of carbohydrate is called a monosaccharide. Mono means one and saccharin comes from the word sugar. Therefore, glucose is the simplest sugar. There are two types of polysaccharides or carbohydrates. They are structural and storage. If you look at this picture, glycogen is a polysaccharide that's stored in the liver and muscles of animals, whereas cellulose is a polysaccharide that makes up the structure of the cell wall of all plant cells. Likewise, starch is the storage molecule, and chitin is a polysaccharide that makes up the exoskeleton of insects and fungal cell walls. Next, we look at lipids. Lipids are greasy, oily, non-polar compounds. They are macromolecules but not polymers. They are made up of same elements as carbohydrates, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And the function of lipids is long-term storage of energy. They make up the cell membrane, and they are the insulating molecules and surrounds the organs to absorb shock. There are two types of fats. Saturated and unsaturated. The saturated fats contain all carbon-carbon single bonds in the fatty acid tails, whereas unsaturated contain one or more carbon-carbon double bonds, producing kinks in the chains. Phospholipid is a structural lipid. It makes up the cell membrane. The other types of lipids are waxes that are found in plants and act as protective layer to prevent transpiration. Sterols are another type of lipid, and examples are cholesterol in animals and sex hormones such as testosterone and estrogen. Proteins are made up of elements carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. The monomer of protein is amino acid, and the single chain of amino acids is called a primary protein. There are 20 amino acids in our body, and about 100 amino acids exist in nature. There are 4 levels of proteins: primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary. All these different levels of proteins are made from 20 amino acids. Examples of proteins are enzymes, antibodies, transport proteins embedded in cell membrane, actin and myosin that help in contraction of muscles, and signaling molecules such as hormones in human body. Nucleic acids are made up of elements phosphorus, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. There are 2 kinds of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid, and RNA stands for ribonucleic acid. DNA is double-stranded, helix structure that can self-replicate. DNA contains genes that store all the genetic information, whereas RNA is a single-stranded, and it is of 3 types: ribosomal or RNA, messenger or mRNA, and transfer or tRNA. RNA transfers the information from DNA and assists in synthesizing the proteins. Now let's take a quick look at the structure of DNA, since you will be learning a lot about DNA the entire next semester. Remember, it's a double helix. It consists of phosphate group, deoxyribose sugar, and 4 nitrogenous bases, namely adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine. We will cover more about this structure when we cover the information in genetics. Finally, the last slide is the list of monomers and the polymers it makes. It's a summary of the entire lecture, but in one small chart. I hope this video helped. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me.